Welcome to episode 31 of the Strategic Momentum Podcast. I'm your host, Connie Steele. Building a marketing and communications agency, much as any business from the ground up, isn't easy. Finding new business, hiring and retaining talent, and consistently delivering quality work can be an ongoing struggle. And that could be particularly challenging when you're servicing the government and nonprofit sector, given their budget limitations. But today's guest, Joseph Ney, has done just that. Along with his partners, they have built a successful marketing communications firm that services the private sector. But it took continuous experimentation and evolution to get to where they are today, and yet they are still tweaking. And that path, of course, wasn't linear, but they were always mission-focused. Let's learn more from Joseph.
So the story is a bit of a long one. I'll hope it's entertaining. I think it's definitely unique. Way back a couple of decades ago now, more than a couple decades, I was in business school and had always seen art as something that you do kind of for fun and business as something that you do to make money, and was presented with the challenge and the magic of marketing in a rigorous context at business school, specifically at the Darden Graduate Business School at University of Virginia, and really sort of fell in love with everything that was involved with that, and decided that I wanted to blend those two things, both of which I was very interested in. My father was a businessman. My mother was an artist. I kind of always saw myself as a little bit of both. And so marketing and then eventually advertising or communications became the route for blending those two and for, sort of defining what I wanted to do with my career. That led to some unique decisions. Coming out of business school, I'm probably the only person who made less money coming out of business school going into it. And actually, even before I started making money again, I went to portfolio school and learned a lot more about professional commercial art. It was with a plan in mind, and that plan was to get the basic skills, the creative side of the business, to get the skills, the capabilities, the mindset down, so that I could start on the creative side. And that was as a result of a lot of conversations and advice from people in the advertising industry who said that if you want to work in creative, make sure you start in creative, because people often try to switch from the account side into creative and don't often succeed in it. So that's the path I chose. Went from, as I mentioned, business school to portfolio school, commercial art school, and then from there to sort of the big leagues, I guess, in New York on Madison Avenue. And I think, interestingly, spent a decent amount of time there. I guess now looking back, it was more of a blip, but for me, it was a decent amount of time learning how big agencies worked and what they did, and in some ways, a lot of what not to do, or at least what could be done better on a smaller scale without all of the money and budget that were associated with things in New York. And so, learning those lessons, decided to act on some earlier planning and thoughts that I had collaborated with a couple of my colleagues from University of Virginia Business School on, and started a small entrepreneurial business, literally 2 people, just before 9/11, which was impeccable timing.
Yeah. Wow, crazy.
That was a good time to be small, I guess, is the nice way to look at that, the positive spin. We were able to stay nimble and flexible and earned our keep by being efficient and doing things either more quickly or better or cheaper or all three than others. And in fact, most of our business back at that time was as a subcontractor to other agencies. So we learned a little bit here and there about how to do things and how things in the Washington area worked, where you have a lot different base of business than in New York and in other areas, a lot more mission-focused stuff. And my business partner and I both had backgrounds in nonprofit before business school. So we were able to leverage a little bit of that experience and find out how we could expand nonprofit agencies and government agencies' missions, amplify their voice, ratchet up their visibility on a nonprofit or government agency budget as opposed to a Fortune 500 budget. So we kept doing, assignment after assignment, and eventually had one of the agencies that subcontracted us approach us about a more strategic partnership, specifically, eventually, an acquisition proposition. And ironically, it sort of matched up exactly with one of the classes that we had during business school, which was an excellent but short class taught by Jim Collins, the author, that centered around, it had a very boring name, something like managing the small business enterprise or managing the growing enterprise. But it was all around finding the entrepreneurial opportunities, among the sort of everyday businesses that you see around you. And one of his theses was that, with the skills that you learn in business school, you can make an impact and have success in almost any field you want to go into. Find out something that you want to go into, and then find the right entry points. And one of those entry points that often works out well is either single proprietorships or family-owned businesses where there's somebody who's looking eventually to get out of the business, but no clear successor or no clear capable successor. And that was exactly the situation we fell into with this company that we had been subcontracted by, Rheingold. For the next 4 or 5 years, we worked through an acquisition where we took over, my business partner and I, the responsibilities, the management, the business development for Janet Reingold, the founder of the firm. And she was able to accomplish her goals by moving more into full-time retirement. And we were able to leapfrog ourselves into some additional contracting opportunities. And it provided, again, a good entrepreneurial opportunity for more exposure, more ability to go after contract bids, et cetera. That brings us, another 15 years forward from that acquisition to where we are now, which has been full of growth and challenge and fun and opportunity.
So what would be helpful is if you wouldn't mind providing an overview of Rheingold for our listeners.
Sure. I'd be happy to, of course. Rheingold is a private sector firm with a public service soul. That's really the best way to convey who we are and what we do. Our tagline officially is "We're on a mission, yours," which is a nice way of saying for those clients that we approach, again, which often include government agencies and programs or nonprofits, we're here to help you. We're here to help you get results to accomplish your mission. And we do that with full enthusiasm and the spirit of partnership. We've been fortunate to work with most of the U.S. departments, most of the federal agencies, lots of different offices and programs, things from preventing suicide among veterans to educating clinical workforce teams in patient safety to helping large government agency infrastructure systems adopt new information platforms, even to helping the U.S. government Department of Defense technical research capabilities around weapons of mass destruction prevention, which is something that we never would have thought that we would be into. But as a result of that work, we got to meet some amazing people who have been at the forefront of developing vaccines for Ebola and other rare diseases that the Department of Defense has on their scanner because they could be used for bad purposes.
Tell us about the challenges in building up this initial team. As you said, you first started with 2, and then over time you grew. But as you were a pretty small firm when you took it over from Janet, what were kind of the key things that got you stuck? There were some core principles that you and your partner, Kevin, had always upheld. And there was a very specific thing that you wanted to have as criteria to run the business.
Well, it's never a bad idea, and it's an even better idea when you have clear and obvious limitations to hire people who are smarter, brighter, more accomplished, and more enthusiastic and opportunistic than you are. From day one, I think we've strived for that outcome. We were lucky that, when we were so small, we couldn't afford to hire the highest priced candidates. And we knew we'd be working for government agencies and nonprofits and others with a mission and a cause. And so we consciously decided not to try and pay top dollar, but to offer other things that would be of value. Working with great people, working with great causes, flexibility in managing your schedule, some measure of work-life balance, and the ability to actually do things rather than sort of being deployed, making copies and answering phone calls all day. So one of those principles is trying to find people who are bright and enthusiastic and willing to take on challenges, and then staying out of their way, letting them learn what they need to do, let us know the resources and the team around them that they need to do those things, and then, sort of helping them do it rather than thinking that we have the answer for everything. Starting right from the beginning, we've been able to hire people at the most junior levels and have them continue to take on more and more challenges and now lead departments. We have literally dozens, probably 20 or 30% of our workforce at least, who started as interns, including now what have become senior directors in our company, multiple senior directors. We have several people who were hired fresh out of school, who've advanced to become recognized national leads in their areas of practice, and in one case, vice president of the firm as well.
Creating a company where they were passionate to come to work every day while also having fun while they were at it was critical for both Joseph and his partner, Kevin. From their previous work experiences, it helped them see what worked, what also not to do, and ways to do it better. But exactly how that would manifest itself was definitely something that they had to figure out all along the way.
You also always are mindful of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And to be honest, I think both Kevin and I were probably too entrepreneurial to be good fits for many entities, especially bigger companies, at least for any extended period of time. I'm certain now that we've been self-employed for 15 or 20 years that we're actually unemployable anywhere else. You always kind of take note of, well, here's how I would do it differently if I were making that decision. And here are the types of things I would want to make available for the people who are working for me. And I think we kind of, collectively had a lot of attitudinal and if you can call them philosophical tenets around the type of workplace we wanted and how we wanted things to run and the attitude that we would try and bring every day, the culture that we wanted to create. And so we were able to bring those and experiment with those and fine tune them a little bit, drop the ones that didn't work and invest in the ones that did. And while we're a unique workplace, that's for sure. I think there are, a lot of people for whom we're not the right workplace, and we're okay with that. Presumably they're just fine with it too. It's not a normative thing. They'll do better somewhere else, and we don't begrudge them that. But at the same time, we think we're the perfect kind of workplace for some other set of people. And the people that are here seem to appreciate that and to thrive in that atmosphere. And that's what we're interested in continuing and promulgating.
Tell me a little bit more about this experimentation, I guess is what you had called it earlier, of, learning along the way. And, while you had somewhat of a vision for what you wanted Rheingold to be, you had mentioned you had tried some things throughout some others, or you seem to have to adjust along the way and pivot to determine what really would create sort of that optimal environment.
That's been, one of the most interesting components of life every day, I think, for us. We're in the communications industry, but we're really in the business of solving problems. Nobody comes to us and says, just do what we did last year and we're going to pay you for it. We're going to pay you more for it. Every new campaign that we have, every new engagement, every new proposal, every new opportunity we consider or we sign on to, there's a new problem, if not a whole slew of new problems, which is energizing. We really like that. It leads us to constantly explore what can work now. But by definition, the things that have worked elsewhere are not going to work in this context. What worked last year, even for the same client, that's not what they want to get past now. We've got new hurdles and new objectives that we need to meet. So that experimentation has kind of been built into our existence and has enabled us to try an idea, see whether it works, see to what degree it works, see for whom it works, and then learn from those findings and iterate, in cycles as long as yearly or semi-annually to as short as weekly and with some of our digital campaigns now even daily. So there's been a nice constant virtuous cycle of, Rheingold meet business challenge. We jump in and do what we think will work. It's never perfect on day one, but we build it to adapt to the imperfections and evolve itself, and then concentrate on making fine-tunements if all that's needed are fine-tunements, or scrapping and reloading for the larger scale opportunities. I think it's probably been fortunate over the same period of time that we've been in the midst of the digital revolution in communications. Ironically, communications is one of the latter, I guess, one of the last industries to really be revolutionized by the digital era, by being small and nimble and flexible and not having big proprietary divisions that we had to deploy and charge into our overhead model. We were able to kind of invent new practice areas and deploy them. And that's been the result. That has led to a lot of our sort of digital capability expansion over the last 10 years, especially.
From the beginning, it sounds like you and Kevin have always had very much this growth mindset, right? So anything that's new, it's a challenge, it's an opportunity to learn. And that has subsequently translated itself into a culture and a process where it sounds like you're really demonstrating the ability to do agile marketing, and which a lot of people talk about, but to truly be able to implement that in all facets of an organization is pretty challenging. And for your people at the end of the day to embrace something that can fluctuate quite a bit, can shift, can pivot, can adapt is not always easy.
I think that's largely true. I'd offer two corrections or clarifications. I'd call it opportunity marketing. I think we've really been focused on responding to opportunities, and growth kind of comes as a result. But we like the challenge of a new opportunity. We like competing against others in the proposal and presentation context. We like accomplishing things and getting real results for clients and delivering them something that they hadn't had before. So those opportunities, I think, are what have led to the growth for us. And then, while Kevin and I happen to be fortunate and be there at the beginning of this, it's really been truly a team effort. There have been a lot of people involved in helping pursue that opportunity mindset, and certainly in leading to the success that collectively we've been able to achieve.
And like any successful team effort, that involves having great people who are all focused on the common goal. In building this strong group, I asked Joseph the challenges they faced when it came to recruitment, particularly finding and retaining top millennial talent, which have been such a core part of helping them evolve and grow their firm.
It's funny, sometimes it feels like it would be easier to attract a workforce from an entirely different nation and culture, speaking a different language, than it can be to interest and engage productively and challenge and deploy into your workforce the millennial population. There are some pretty different tendencies and mindsets and principles among the millennial generation with those that preceded it, as well as with any generation, really. So those are there. I think, the older you get, maybe the more you exaggerate those in your own mind. I'm also generally a person who believes that while things certainly change and cultures change and attitudes change from generation to generation, we've been on a constant path of change for thousands of years. And, it is certainly the case that some of what seems to us to be a more drastic change or difference among generations has probably been experienced before. The generations of the 30s and 40s would certainly have registered a significant feeling of change with the generations of the 50s and 60s that followed them. So, this happens all the time. I think it's part of the grand human mosaic. You try to learn from it and move on. But specifically, challenges in attracting millennials. I think millennials have been exposed to a lot. Obviously, there's more information and more, you can call it clutter, more distraction, certainly more misinformation to go along with that information now than there ever has been before. And millennials have grown up with all of that. They're used to streaming, they're used to multitasking, they're used to a lot of different information viewing, processing, and pace of change trends that previous generations were not accustomed to. That's a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing in that it can help us innovate faster. It can help us reach millennials and other generations, other targets and demographics better when those folks can come on board and adapt into our workflow. But it can also interfere with the process of becoming, part of the work stream here and becoming efficient and making sure they understand that, this is part of a team effort. It's not an effort built around them. And so we go through those challenges and transitions, I think, like any employer does. I think it helps that we are pretty flexible on a lot of stuff and then have some things that we're not at all flexible on. And if this isn't going to be the type of place for you, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly. But if it is, then you respond to the flexibility and you respond to having, again, probably a little more responsibility than you might have in other workplaces. And it's built largely around a culture of trust. We actively avoid micromanagement. We try to have as few people looking over other people's shoulders as we can, because we've got a lot of stuff we need to get done. We've got a lot of problems we need to solve. We need to be smart and quick and efficient and do a lot of the things that our clients are relying on us for. When we hire you, we're trusting that you can help us do that, and that when you come to the end of an assignment or the end of your part in something that you're doing, you're going to raise your hand and say, "Hey, I'm ready to jump on to the next thing." And we don't have a manual system in place or even an automatic system in place to check and see if that's what's happening or not. We rely on the results showing whether that's happening or not. And actually, we rely on our team to let us know we don't see so-and-so stepping forward the way that we're stepping forward. Do they know how this really works? That's something we hear and see more often than it is the case that we feel like, this person hasn't billed the right number of hours this week.
Having the autonomy to take on significant responsibility from the beginning really seems like that has set the tone for getting the most out of your employees and maybe having them recognize what their potential even is when they might not have.
I'm sure we're not perfect in it. I'm sure there are times when people haven't gotten that message, or when we haven't been open enough in getting that next opportunity to them, or haven't haven't been clear enough in communicating something. But that's what we try for. And, interestingly, we've been looking, now that we've reached 150 or so employees, we've been looking at the notion of size and management and how, especially around that number of 150, there's been some research how human behavior differs, so that we may have come to a point of divergence, if you will, on what was effective in the past not being necessarily effective going forward. The research in this area has surfaced in everything from past civilizations to even the size of deployed units within the military. There seems to be a breaking point in terms of how many people a human can really know and interact with, and efficiently, sort of remember and manage relationships. And that breaking point often seems to surface around the population of about 150, coincidentally, where we are as a company. And so we're conscious of the fact that the way that we've done things over the last 15 and even 30 years, going back to the beginnings of Rheingold, isn't necessarily the path for us going forward. So we're kind of actively looking at how do we expand our capacity. As the partners of this agency, we don't know everybody the way we used to know them. We don't work with them every day the way that we used to. We don't manage or in as involved a capacity day to day on projects as much as we used to, and can't, physically for every project. So it forces us to make decisions about how we manage people, how we communicate about managing people and projects, and how we sort of motivate, empower, and lead through a group of management rather than just a small group of partners or as individuals.
Change is constant and evolution is the norm in Rheingold's culture, as is now in business today. Being conscious of not doing things the way you used to is paramount, because what was effective in the past may not be effective going forward. Change also means learning whether or not someone is going to be a good fit and identifying it quickly, as Joseph will tell us. You can't force fit something that just won't align.
As business owners who've been involved in this for a while and had some measure of success, we have the luxury of sort of allowing ourselves to be less forceful in dictating the way that everything needs to be, especially, again, in light of the learning and the research that we've seen, and just sort of the observation that we've made of how things evolve and as how things grow. We're cognizant that the way we've managed things isn't going to be right for everybody at every scale all the time, and we need to be able to allow for some flexibility and hopefully some growth from the rest of our team to find out, taking some of the idiosyncrasies out maybe, or to find out as we look at, from a managerial perspective, from a corporate perspective, what does Rheingold really need, and what are the things that will enable us to continue to be able to meet the challenge for our clients best. I think by virtue of our experience, maybe we're a little more able or more inclined than some to allow that process to happen organically rather than feeling like we have to impose the solution on it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what other recommendations do you have for folks looking to sustain momentum? Because you've certainly created quite a bit as it relates to hiring and retaining great millennial talent and maintaining a compelling culture and creating the right process as an organization grows.
One of the neat learnings from Jim Collins' class that I took back in business school was that organizations that had a mission statement did better than those who didn't. It didn't really matter what the mission statement was the interesting part of the learning. It mattered that they had one. And so I think we've always adopted a little bit of that principle into the way that we run things here at Rheingold. it didn't matter that we had the perfect culture or that our culture was the most desired, right? Or that it was, again, for instance, the most desired employee destination, or that we were going to pay top dollar or have the highest, profile position. It mattered that we had something that we believed in and a culture that sort of worked for us. And so I think for us, it's always been more the case that we take our work seriously, our assignments seriously, but not ourselves. That enabled a lot of fun things to happen. It enabled us to manage to blow off steam and manage us to lose some of the friction that might happen in other contexts. Because at the end of the day, we were able to laugh at ourselves a good bit. We tried not to get too concerned internally with titles and recognition of credits. Really, in simple terms, helping the team advance and focusing more on the results than on the path or whose contributions led to results or who was saying what. And so for us, that culture became a key, I think, even as we started to entertain and engage millennials and try to bring them on board as part of our workforce. For other agencies, I wouldn't suggest adopting our culture. I'd suggest making sure you have one and making sure that it's one that fits and works for you, and then letting people know that's who you are and that's who you're going to be, and that's how things work there. And I think certainly when job applicants can sense that, there's a firm culture in place, people believe in the same thing, they're kind of bought into the same way of operating, they have an understanding for it, they're able to make better decisions about whether they should join that team or not. And, for us, we try to be very upfront that this is not the right place to work for, probably some large section of the population. There's probably less structure here than there is at a lot of other places. That may mean there's more opportunity here than are at certainly some places. But, there are trade-offs along the way, and we want you to be able to evaluate us during your interview process as much as we evaluate you. And so the more transparent you can be about that stuff, then hopefully the fewer mismatches you have. And again, we're not perfect in it. We have, people that join and think it's going to work out, and then it doesn't. Sometimes that's a one-way decision. Sometimes it's a mutual decision. But we try to get to that point quickly and recognize it quickly. And if it's not working out, we certainly wish people well in a different context. But we can't change who we are. We're not going to change our culture. The way that this group works together works for us. So if it doesn't work for you, it's time for you to look somewhere else.
Right, have a very clear identity of who you are and what you want to be. And what advice would you give your younger self?
Play more hockey.
Have more fun.
Yeah. And then on the serious side, probably, try to more diligently stay abreast of more trends and stuff, and podcasts like yours, other resources along the way. I think, you always have that desire, but when you're checking all the items that you have to get done during the day and the week and the month, those things string together into years, and you discover, man, I haven't read enough lately, or I don't know about this thing, or there's other stuff that I should find out more about. So doing more of that would always be helpful and fun.
And to close, any last words of wisdom?
Gunga galunga.
What's that?
You'll have to go back and watch Caddyshack to get the full meaning.
And finally, what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
Email jney@rheingold.com. That's REINGOLD. Or you can look me up on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much for being on the show. Great insight and advice today.
Oh, thank you, Connie. Have a great day.
Having a clear mission for your organization is key, and it doesn't necessarily matter that you have the perfect culture, pay top dollar for talent, or offer high-profile positions or titles. What matters is that everyone is bought into the same philosophy of operating and has an inherent understanding of it. Focus on delivering great results because of that dedication to a client's mission, as well as your own, can certainly lead to success. But that's not all. The culture of experimentation enables your company to continuously evolve and grow, keeps you ahead of the curve, and helps you stay conscious of the fact that how things were done in the past may not necessarily pave the path to success going forward. So figure out what works and figure it out quickly. Adjust, fine-tune, and always go in with that opportunity mindset. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. You can connect with Joseph via LinkedIn or by email at jney@rheingold.com. That's JNEY@REINGOLD.com. And if you've liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show on iTunes and leave us a review. This is what helps others find the podcast. You can also find us in the Google Play Store, Spotify, and Stitcher Radio. And if you want to hear previous episodes or get show notes from this episode, you can also visit us on our podcast page at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.